model is a model that takes into account the inner energetic infrastructure of life. Okay. So in this presentation, what we'll be doing this morning is we're going to look at the heart in particular from the point of view of the soul, from the point of view of the noumenal model. The soul, of course, is described by Plato, the Egyptians, and the ancients as that organizing principle, the underlying supra-energetic organizing principle of our whole organism. Okay. So we've talked about the heart before, remember, in the lecture on the heart of life, where we explored some of the energetic qualities of the heart. And we looked at the importance of the heart as a source of energetic connectedness, right? And the center of physiological coherence for the whole organism. So we've looked at the heart energetically. And you might remember that we spoke about coherence as an illustration of a much more subtle level of organization of the body, that of the electromagnetic fields. Biophoton light transmission, biophoton communication, and energetic and quantum level processes that determine then what happens chemically, hormonally, and mechanically. So the chemicals, hormones, and action, and minerals, and everything else that we find in our body are the footprints left behind after the energetic interactions. Okay, so we always have to keep that in mind, that there's this whole level underneath what we can see or measure or even see in some of our very sensitive equipment, that there's a whole level underneath that level then is the product of. Okay? And that level, of course, is very important for us because it's the level that homeopathy acts on, right? Right. Okay. So we talked about the squid detector. We've been able to measure and map the electromagnetic field of the heart, which we know now reaches out several feet or more. Using these superconducting quantum interference devices, these magnetometers, so we've been able to scientifically measure the heart's electromagnetic field. Okay, so not only does the electromagnetic field reach out 5 or 6 feet, okay, but it also picks up and harmonizes with other hearts and the Earth's field. So we're linked together and we're synchronizing at a very deep level to an external signal in the Earth's magnetic field environment into each other all the time. Now, the question we can ask is, how does the heart generate such a strong field? We don't have magnets in our chest. We don't have electromagnets in our chest that are moving. So how is that possible? Something we measure, something we observe, but we can't explain. So what I'd like to propose today is an explanation of that phenomenon. So to understand that phenomenon, we have to go to an immaterial dimension, one that biological science hasn't really admitted to completely, even though their model isn't working so well anymore, but there we are. So the electromagnetic field is also a footprint, okay, just like the hormones, just like the chemicals, just like what we find in the body. The electromagnetic field is also a physical manifestation of something much deeper, right? A physical sign that emanates from the implicate order, from the invisible, immaterial dimension of reality that underlies our physical reality and physical phenomena. Okay, so we're going to look at that immaterial dimension now. And we're going to explore it a little bit. What is it made of? How does it work? What are its attributes? And we're going to look at a model that explains how this dimension works and how it can produce such strong electromagnetic fields such as that of the heart. Okay, so now let's look at the dynamic model together. Okay, so just in case you forgot, just to review, the dynamic, the word is based on the word noumenon, which is derived from the Latin noumen, which means deity, divine, divine will, divine presence, or soul. So which, according again to Plato's definition, is the dynamic organizing principle of life. So the noumenal realm is the dynamic, energetic realm that underlies and informs the phenomenal realm of sensory reality. Ancient scholars referred to the noumenal realm as the realm of pure ideals, ideas, or forms. The noumenal world is the world of higher realities, including the highest reality in its various manifesting aspects referred to as universals or transcendentals. This is the realm to which the soul belongs. Socrates held that the world of form, this transcendental realm, is transcendent to our own world, the world of substances, and also the essential basis of reality. It is superordinate to matter. So forms are the purest of things, and forms provide the essence of everything that exists. Sort of the essential basis of the different forms that reality takes. So we can say there's countless tables in the world, right? And all sorts of tables, but even if you saw a broken table that had fallen from the 4th story onto the sidewalk and was completely mangled and had its legs sticking in every direction, you would still know it's a table. So there is something in the essence, even of something man-made, that we know and that we would call a table, even if it doesn't look like a table. We know that it was a table or could be a table. So that's the level of form. You see, it's not necessarily visible materially, but we all have that part of our brain that holds form and holds essence. And this is the part of the brain that we like to develop at Mish, is that part of the brain that is devoted to contemplation and that can be in contact with this level of form. And that's what we're going to do today. Okay, and this is when you're reading the ancients, when you're reading Plato and he talks about intelligence, what he meant by intelligence was that ability of the human being to contemplate and to see this deeper level of reality. Okay. Now you've all taken the course Discover Holism, right? And there you'll learn that Jan Christian Smuts brought the formal cause one step further. So by means of holism again to review, is the driving force behind creation and evolution, right? And it uses formal cause, it uses those intricate designs, those blueprints, formal movement to be able to create blueprints, to be able to create the plans of new beings, new things that arise in nature. Okay, so these forms are the physical expression of spiritual qualities such as beauty, harmony, majesty, power. That's what Smuts was explaining to us. He says evolution happens from this force of holism that brings forth the expression of the divine, the noumenal expression, the expression of true reality, of that underlying noumenal reality of the divine qualities. Now these blueprints are very special, and they have to follow the rules of sacred geometry. So if you don't, I'm just going to talk about sacred geometry just a little bit for those of you who might not know what it is. There's a lot more in your handout. But sacred geometry is what we have discovered that the ancients knew. The Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, they all knew about sacred geometry, and that's what makes their temples and their buildings so phenomenal even today, is that they were built according to what they understood as the rules of that noumenal underlying layer of reality. So one of the things in sacred geometry is known as the golden mean, okay, which is 1.618. And if you're to take any of the great buildings of antiquity, you would find that this golden mean is used to build all the proportions, the height, the width, the length, the relationship between all of the parts of the building are all according to the golden mean. Where did they get this? They got this by studying nature. What they realized in nature is that everything in nature follows the golden rule. And so even in this shell, you can see with the Fibonacci series, okay, which is part of the golden rule. And how does that series build? Well, you start with 1, and then the next, every number following is the sum of the last number and the number before it. So the next number would be 1 plus 0. So it'd be another 1. And then you get 1 plus 1, which is 2. Then 2 plus 1 is 3. 3 plus 2 is 5. 5 plus 3 is 8, etc. And if you do that, you would be able then to have an accurate measure of the proportion of each one of the volumes inside this shell. Because it would be precisely that. Do you see the precision with which nature works? Isn't it beautiful? So that's the Fibonacci series. But we see the same series in the proportions of the human body. And one of the things that makes the images of antiquity so beautiful is that they all follow that golden mean as well in the proportions of the body, the proportions of the hand. We see that in our hand. We see that when we curve our finger. In our face. So you'll see a number of examples in your handout where the same golden mean applies to all of the proportions that we call beautiful in nature, that arise naturally in nature. We can say, well, that's sort of interesting. How practical is it? Well, it took us a while. But as recently as 2011, the International Journal of Cardiology, not your everyday magazine, published research articles that found, quote, in healthy human hearts, vertical and transverse dimensions are according to the golden ratio. In mild heart failure, the ratio 1.618 was maintained, but in end-stage heart failure, the ratio was significantly reduced. So we now know that that number is not only about form, but it's also related to function. And that sacred geometry isn't just about form, it is about function. It is about the expression of life. So now let's look at that sacred geometry dynamically, which is why we say not just noumenal, but dynamic, because we're going to look at that sacred geometry in motion and see how it actually creates the functioning of the heart. Okay. So the formal cause of the heart. So that shape that you see there is called a chestahedron. And that Rudolf Steiner, who's the founder of anthroposophical medicine, which we're going to introduce today, and we'll talk about a lot more next year when we do pediatrics, because it's really important to understand the formal cause as it creates new life and it grows in children, because it makes a very big difference and helps us understand energetically what's happening and how to assist that without disturbing it, because it is so delicate and because it is invisible. And because we use an invisible medicine, it's very important for us to know what we're dealing with. So, So this understanding comes to us from Rudolf Steiner. He was a genius and a seer. He was born in 1861. And he described the formal cause of the heart as this chestahedron. The chestahedron has 7 surfaces that are exactly the same surface area. Now, whenever you have a form that has surfaces that are equal and of the same area, Plato called formal. This was a form that then was ideal and part of the noumenal realm. Okay, part of sacred geometry then. So, Steiner said, if you want to know the formal cause or the noumenal reality of the heart, you would look at the chestahedron. You would look at this 7-sided shape. So this was interesting. Then came along this really interesting fellow from San Francisco, a retired teacher. He was also a sculptor and a geometer. He taught geometry his whole life. And he read this from Steiner and he goes, well, how can a shape become function? So he got the idea to build it. And he made many different models of the chestahedron. And he made one that he had a little stem on it that he could put in his drill so that he could spin it, because he wanted to see what it would look like if he spun it. And he fooled around with it a bit, and when he spun it, it actually sort of looked like a bell. He found that interesting, but that still doesn't explain to me anything about the heart. So then he dipped it in water. You have to be retired and a little bit crazy to do all this, of course, but thankfully there's a few of us around like that. Anyway, and what he did was he spun the form in a glass of water at this high speed, and it made this really interesting vortex. But then when he started tilting it, it made a central vortex and a vortex on the side. In other words, something that looks like this. So there was a central vortex, and then this secondary vortex that grew on the side of the central vortex. And now I'm going to show you, if we were to cut the heart across this way, we would see exactly that shape. So he went further and he dipped his form, into clay and on plastic and all sorts of things, and soapy liquid, and then he blew into it to puff it up. And guess what it started to look like? So in making this shape a little more organic and fleshing it out, it actually looked like the left ventricle of the heart, physically. And then, of course, we know spinning this form then creates the right ventricle and the vortex that is next to it. So the formal cause of the human heart is this dynamic noumenal form. So we experience the heart with our 5 senses, but what creates the heart is the dynamic noumenal form that is spinning at a very high speed. And even the angle at which it spins is important, because that angle is the precise angle that if you were to put the heart in a perfect cube, if you were to put the chestahedron into a perfect cube, it would be at the precise angle that our heart is in our body. Because nobody could figure out why the heart is at that precise angle. And that precise angle, by the way, is as important for the physiology of the heart, for the functioning of the heart, as the golden mean proportions as well. Okay. So there is a structure, an invisible formal structure that Plato and Aristotle and all these ancients talked about, that we never saw physically, but that have an underlying reality, that are there nonetheless. Now, I told you that he first saw a bell when he spun it, right? So what was interesting about this bell is that Rudolf Steiner also talked about a bell shape linked to the heart. And he said that before the soul becomes living matter, as you or me, and it is apparent to the inner eye, okay, as a noumenal form, as the shape of a downward opening bell. Now this is where it gets even more interesting, because it's not only Steiner who said that. The bell shape was used in ancient Egyptian drawings to represent the human soul coming down to earth from the heavens to incarnate in flesh. These bell shapes were said to be the seeds of spirit, as well as the geometric templates for a growing human heart. And there's the drawing. And this is a representation of the sky goddess Nut, who's giving birth to new life. It was said that she swallows the sun and gives, at night and gives birth to it every day. So that she was really the energy or the goddess that gave birth to life and gave birth to actually the source of life. But if we look at this a little bit closer, we'll see those little bells coming down and forming the new soul. This is how the Egyptians would represent the birthing of a new soul, is usually in a lotus flower, of coming up just like a plant would come up from the earth. The clay beings that we are, made of clay, would come out of the earth when these little bells would come and implant in us through the sacred geometry of the movement of life. So, the idea of the heart as a mechanical pump has been around for a few centuries. And to be honest with you, scientifically, it doesn't make sense. The apex of the left ventricle of the heart, at the bottom point, the tissue is so paper thin that if the heart was really a pump, it would be broken through. If you apply hydraulic physics to the heart and you say that this is a pump, the physics don't add up. The heart isn't a pump. It is the creator of vortexes, and very high-speed vortexes that draw the blood in. And we'll see actually that what we've discovered is that the blood is flowing in an embryo even before the heart is formed. Okay, our blood is streaming rhythmically through the blood vessels way before the heart. Something other than the heart is acting and responsible for the movement of blood. We're understanding more and more, and I'll talk to you about this perhaps another time, maybe next year, that circulation, especially in the capillaries, is a function of a particular characteristic of water. And we understand water to be the etheric carrier of life. And it is through water that our blood streams, through the flow of the plasma in our capillaries, that our blood streams. So we'll talk all about that later. Not a mechanical kind of pump. So the heart is a streaming device. And in the left ventricle, the spin of fluid is captured and twirled back upon itself. The blood enters the left ventricle in a clockwise spiral. And by the time it comes out of the left ventricle, it is spinning in a clockwise motion. So there's this streaming action that happens and a balancing action that happens in the heart. And I'm talking to you from science now. At the moment when the blood flow reverses, there's no movement. So there's a reversal that happens. So it spins, and then as it's coming out of the left ventricle, it spins the other way. And right there is this moment of stillness, is this still point between the two spins, where there's total stillness. That place of dynamic rest is where our meditation is best focused if we want to still ourselves. We're going to practice that in a few minutes. So this is the exact moment, simultaneous in time and space, that represents the eternally present heart-centered state in each human being. The heart is there to create balance, to create vortexes. It's the mediator between the forces that come together to create the complex life form that we call the human being. But that's not all. There's another layer here, which is even more fascinating. These vortexes are important not only to the movement of life, but to another dimension, which is why I have all of these hearts in gold, is that this high-speed vortex that is on this very subtle level transforms ordinary gold into what scientists call ORM, orbitally rearranged monoatomic elements, ORME, which are superconductors. These superconductors can be made out of the regular conductors, gold, silver, and platinum, and copper. Okay, but they become superconductors when they are subject to high-speed vortexes, which we've done in laboratories. And these are how we make superconductors. So the ORMs are superconductors capable of conducting a variety of impulses virtually at the speed of light. There's no friction, very little energy required, and it dramatically increases the speed at which signals can travel. So the signals in our body, when we take our homeopathic remedy, it acts on us instantaneously. And that happens through the superconductors that are flowing through our blood and through every part of our body. It happens through the ORMs. It happens through the gold that is transformed and brought to a new level of superconduction through the high-speed vortex of the heart. Is that more interesting than a pump? So without the primary superconducting matrix created by gold, nerve transmission and life itself wouldn't be possible. So ORM elements, what's interesting about them is that they can't be measured by conventional atomic measuring devices, like spectrophotometers, because these devices depend on the interaction of the gold with other elements. And when they become these superconductors, they don't interact with any other elements, okay? Nor with measuring devices, so they can't be detected. So when we measure the amount of gold in your blood, we're measuring only the physical gold and not the ORM. So we have no idea how much ORM, how much superconducting gold is actually in our body. But one thing we do know, and that we have known for over 50 years or longer, in which you will learn all about in your oligosols and cell salts course, is something called the oligosol of gold, copper, and silver. This is a very powerful oligosol, and the gold that is in it is of an enzymatic nature that gets directly imported into the bloodstream. And as soon as it gets into the bloodstream, guess where it goes? Right into the high-speed vortex of the heart to be transformed into ORM. We find that someone's health, they can be, flat out after a disease, completely debilitated, and copper, gold, silver can really help them come back to life. It's the thing that we take when we get sick. It's the thing to build ourselves up. We feel more vital, stronger when we take, not, over amount, but just what we need, always in microdoses, just enough. Huh? That's the important law to respect. Is too much of a good thing isn't good. It's when it's needed, when it's needed, it replenishes that gold, and our heart is then able to replenish the orm and our superconductor so that those signals can be carried everywhere. So copper, gold, silver makes a really nice complement to homeopathic treatment if you're ill, because it'll help the transportation of those signals to everywhere it needs to go at the speed of light. Okay. So our hearts are transformers, creators of superconducting gold, as well as being that which interconnects us on an electromagnetic level and all sorts of more subtle levels. So I wanted to share that with you before we did a heart meditation, so that we could bring those ideas together. All right? Okay. So it's important to recognize that coherence, the coherence that we talked about in the Heart of Life, is not only the electromagnetic field that's generated by the spinning heart, but it's also the effect of the superconductors, that superconducting gold that is flowing through our bloodstream and creating a vortex. Okay? So in nerves, it's the superconducted quantum coherence that is the true nerve impulse. Okay? It's what organizes the body into a coherent organism. That's how coherence really happens. Okay, and it leaves behind a chemical footprint, right? As it passes through our nerves, that's the chemical footprint of the calcium ions and the other electromagnetically charged ions that we associate with the flow of the electrical impulse in our nerves. So just to remember that underneath what we can measure and see is a whole other dimension of motion and movement, a dynamic noumenal dimension. So let's try to connect with that dimension now that we do this little heart meditation. And I put a few images for you. One of the perfect, so you have the chestahedron, which you're going to imagine in your heart at the right angle, because you're going to imagine this beautiful crystal cube in the center of your chest, and you're going to imagine the chestahedron sitting in that cube. And if you like the spinning bell, go for it, because that's also a beautiful little golden image. And just think of that angle that your heart's in. Imagine the chestahedron, and then let's close our eyes and see if we can take a deep breath in.